and welcome to this week's episode of QTV. Wow, have we got a fantastic program coming up this evening.
We'll be chatting with long-time HIV survivor David Menadue.
We continue our Glimpses into Asia series, visiting Yangon in Myanmar, where despite laws banning gay sex, they have a pride event each year in the public park.
Writer and academic Dennis Altman talks about his new book and memoir, Diary of an Accidental Activist.
And our Moment in Time series remembers the contribution made by Graham Carberry, who founded the Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives back in 1978.
We'll see if it works. How embarrassing. It is so 80s. The biggest challenge in my life obviously was finding out in 1984 that I had HIV. There was a bit of a perception in the early 80s that we weren't at risk, that it was something that was happening over in America and not happening on our doorstep. By the late 80s, I was getting sick. Remember, there were no treatments at all. So I had 6 AIDS-defining illnesses. I looked like a scarecrow. I'd lost all the fat from my face, arms and legs. I was very weak. Long-term survival's a bit of luck in a way. You can't deny that, I'm not a better person than all my friends who died. That's absolute rubbish. It's just, I think the particular conditions I got were less devastating to my body. The PCP was pretty bad, and I took a long time to get over that, and it did kill friends of mine. But what I didn't get was the cancers, the Kaposi sarcoma, which riddled the bodies of so many of my friends. It ended up in their lungs and choked them, and horrible things. I experienced rejection from sexual partners all the time. That was a very common experience, and I used to celebrate when I found another positive person because I thought, well, they're not going to give me a hard time. But, the problem with having a positive partner, which I did have a number, is they go and die on you. I was born in Numurkah, which is in northern Victoria, a little bit further north of Shepparton. My father was a sheep shearer. I started to experience what a lot of gay men go through in terms of bullying. Country boys come from farms, think that anybody that's, slightly a bit out of the ordinary, in those days anyway, we're talking the 60s, got a pretty hard time. I was desperate to get to university. I was kind of intellectually disposed. I wanted to be a writer. That was my passion. And then, of course, I ended up a school teacher in the country, which is unfortunate because I really didn't want to go back to the country. But in the studentship days, you had to do a couple of years wherever they sent you. Ended up getting a dream job. I ended up working in an area of the education department called Student Publications. It was really the golden years of my life. I lived in a household of people that wanted to go out to, I think pokies had started by then, at the Prince of Wales on a Sunday night. They wanted to do the bar scene. And I would be going to activist conferences and being quite different. So I was the political one, and in some ways I had 2 groups of friends. I had the bar scene friends And I had the activist friends, some of who abhorred the bars that wouldn't go near one. And here was me mixing the bar scene. I'd keep the GCNs in my car out the back of the Prince of Wales, and I'd go and get them just as people were starting to leave, standing outside Pokies trying to sell a GCN on a Sunday night. And my friends would be going to the bar saying, oh, there's old David trying to flog off the GCNs. And sometimes I'd buy them just to keep me happy. I had been living a pretty dishonest existence with them in a way. I hadn't told my mother in 1984 that I had HIV. Gosh, I had to ring my mother up that night after the interview and say, look, Mum, I'm very sorry I've delayed this, but I'm a gay man and I have AIDS. But she was okay. As it turned out, she started to spend a lot more time with me. I introduced her to my counsellor, who spent a lot of time talking to her and helping explain what would happen, and, you know, to my doctors. So, you know, my mother was loving. You know, she wasn't going to reject me because of it. My father was a different story, because, as I said, I hadn't been particularly close to him. And, you know, he was a masculine shearer, and so I had to ring him up and say, look, Dad, I know this might disappoint you, but, you know, I'm a gay man and I've got AIDS, and I hope I survive it, but you never know. And, you know, to his eternal credit, it almost makes me cry when I say this, but he said, look, you're my son and I love you. And, you know, that's all I need to hear, really. So the other thing I'm proud of is this, I wrote a book. And the following year, much to my surprise, I was asked by the Mardi Gras committee if I would help lead the parade. Life today is quite nice in many ways. I have a partner at the moment.
Coming up next, we're going to take a look at the Yangon Pride Festival in Myanmar.
Yangon celebrated LGBT Pride for the 5th time this year. This is the 2nd year that the event has been held at a public park. Hundreds of mostly young Burmese citizens and Westerners came out to support the community. The event was held over 2 weekends, and it included games, drag performances, music by the Yangon Pride Choir, pop music performances, and movie screenings. The park was filled with vendors as well as a photo exhibition documenting the lives of the LGBT community in parts of the world where being gay is still highly stigmatized. If you're up for it, you could also have your future told to you by a local and fabulous fortune teller. Although huge strides have been made, the local population still faces some challenges in a country where old colonial laws still in place make homosexuality illegal.
So, as you know, our country had already been entered the military situation. That's why when we see the police officer uniform, definitely we lost our confidence. That's why when the police officer at us, we are afraid to face with the police officer. But at the time, we sometimes ran away. We sometimes follow the police officer without knowing the reason why we have to be arrested by the police officer. But police officer tell us you will be arrested by the 377. So if you want to be escaped, you can come with us by jailing for 1 month.
Well, what can you tell me about the LGBT community here in Myanmar?
Yeah, they are trying to get equal rights with like the other citizen. The LGBT here are discriminate and violence, so especially transgender men and women. Yeah.
So what kind of violence do transgendered men and women face?
Yeah, sexually different kinds of violence, sexually or physically and mentally. Yeah.
Organizers are hopeful, though. They have seen Pride grow immensely from its humble beginnings. How have you seen Myanmar change in terms of the LGBT community?
Well, it has changed so much. I remember this is the 5th edition of this festival, and last year we had the first edition in a public park, and you can feel it's changing, and it's changing very fast. This is the 2nd year we do it in a public park. Before we were doing the festival in it's a diplomatic compound, so we were kind of out of the radar of the Myanmar authorities. Now this year and last year we are in a public space. This year actually we have been able to do a public boat parade along the Yangon River, so it's starting becoming more open, and we are working for it. And now I feel that in Myanmar, in Yangon, it's very much open. Now we might need to work in other cities, because in the countryside it's a little bit people are still facing not the openness that you can feel in Yangon. So definitely it has actually changed very much.
The night was capped off by a huge dance party where everyone let loose and had fun. Although the Myanmar government definitely still has some major human rights violation issues, not just with the LGBT community, its citizens are ready for change and are bravely pushing forward an equal rights agenda. This is Eduardo Culbo.
Coming up next is Dennis Altman, who spoke on Joy 94.9's Saturday Magazine.
Then we'll remember Graham Carberry, who founded the Gay and Lesbian Archives back in 1978.
Dennis Altman is a name that really our community owes you a lot, Dennis. You've been at the barricades for 40 odd years.
Oh,
go on, you have.
At least, because
Yeah.
my first memory of the barricades was that first ever gay demonstration in Australia, in Sydney, in I think 1971.
1971.
I was, of course, only 3, and I was there in a pram. I hope everyone realises that.
Now, that was during the McMahon government.
It probably was, yes.
And 1971, that's a very, very long time ago. Your latest book, Unrequited Love: Life of an Accidental Activist. Why were you an accidental activist? You didn't. Well, you probably never thought, "Oh God, I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing this."
I'm always a bit uneasy when people term me an activist, because most of my activism has actually stemmed from my writing. And I think of myself more as a writer than an activist. The accidental part really goes back to 1971 when I was in New York. I needed somewhere to live. I was there for a number of months, and I found an apartment share in the East Village, which was actually where the people who produced the first gay paper in New York, Come Out, used to meet. So I found myself, because of where I was living, part of the collective of that very early Gay Lib paper. And in a sense, that led me into, I guess, the rest of my life.
I think you are an activist, but your activism often takes the form of what you write.
Yes.
You do research, you base, what you say on the evidence that you find and that you verify. Where do you think we are now, Dennis? The next challenge that we as a community face, we met marriage equality, and we didn't, we won that argument, but I think we left some people behind and some groups behind. The religious freedoms discussion, or the religious discrimination discussion, what's your gut feel on that? Are we approaching it the right way? Are we leaving people behind on this? What are your thoughts?
My gut feeling is that we're probably handling it reasonably well, but I think I also don't think that if the bill in its present form goes through, it will in practice be nearly as disastrous as people think. But I recognise that because there are certain things in the legislation which are certainly unattractive and could be used to discriminate, we need to oppose it. But my sense is that the real point about the marriage debate was that we had a national vote by accident, one could say, or by Peter Dutton trying to be cleverer than he turned out to be, which showed that a clear majority of people in Australia actually accept us.
Yes.
And accept a certain degree of sexual and gender diversity. I think the two issues that I get most upset about are, in fact, what's going on globally, what's going on in many countries near Australia, such as Indonesia, where there is mounting homophobia. Yes. And I think we need a much bigger and more nuanced discussion about how we, in a country where we're pretty well off, in all sorts of ways, can help people in those sorts of situations. And I think one of the areas where we can do that, quite specifically, is around people who seek asylum in Australia because they're persecuted for their gender identity or their sexuality. And I think this is something I'd really like to see our community take up in a big way and exercise political pressure over.
Why do you think they don't?
Well, I wouldn't be too adamant in saying they don't, because there are a number of groups.
A lot of people are
who are. There's actually a very interesting conference that will be held in Canberra in middle of November on this issue. The Pride Foundation, which is the former GALFA, which I'm very proud to be a patron, so therefore I'm biased, but Pride Foundation has taken this up. There are a number of... I think that most people get it. I think we haven't yet brought it into the mainstream discussion or the mainstream gay media.
I want to take you back to the book a second, because I think you've got a phenomenal life, and writing your memoirs and trying to give people a glimpse into just a fraction of the stuff you've done must have brought back for you so many memories, perhaps of things that you had forgotten even you had done. How did you actually get through the process of actually getting all those great pieces of story and a narrative onto the page?
Well, it's a lovely question. Look, I think I should explain for people who don't know that it's written in the form of a diary. It's basically a diary over 2 years, and I use that form to go back and forth in time. And the reason I could do that primarily is that because of advice I was given when I was young by Christopher Isherwood, I have kept a diary now for over 40 years. Now, the diary is essentially an extended appointments book, and it is sometimes embarrassing when I discover there were people who were of enormous moment to me, and I have no idea anymore who they are. But the great thing about diaries is they give you dates, they give you a chronology, and they allow you, therefore, to go and check other things. I also, I've plagiarised myself, which I think writers are allowed to do. And so I've included a few bits that are actually from, in some cases, articles that never got published. So I'm the only person who had access to them. And it was fun doing that. I have, for example, an account of being on some terrible LA talk show in the early 80s when I was promoting another book and meeting the strippers from Chippendales.
Fantastic. So another question for you. You've done an awful lot. What are the things that you've done that you're most proud of?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've thought about that. I suppose because I'm so conscious of the fact that one does things that come to you by chance. I think I was very, very lucky because I was in New York, the beginning of the gay lib movement, and I wanted to write about. I wrote a book, and I guess I'm proud of the fact in some ways that book had an impact, and I know it had an impact because people write to me. It every few years it gets reprinted. It's been republished in a number of languages, a number of countries. But I don't know that I think very much about things I'm proud of. I had this lovely moment the other day. I could say this is something I'm very proud of. I ran into a current state minister who was very excited because he told me he'd just tweeted an article about me. And I thought, that's nice. I like having, it's nice to think that somebody up there in Spring Street is actually reading about me and takes it seriously enough to tweet it.
So the future, Dennis, is there something or some issue or activity in your life that you haven't done?
Oh, a lot.
That you, so, you know, if you had your wish, if you could make, you know, this event or this activity happen, the number one, what would it be?
I think I wish is very dangerous, isn't it? Do I get 3 wishes? Going back in time...
Macca's a genie, he can grind you one.
Oh, I like this. Okay, Macca. So, I wish I had learned to scuba dive. I wish I had tried to learn Spanish when I was much younger than I am now, because I find it difficult. And I wish that my partner, Anthony Smith, hadn't died as he did 7 years ago.
Graham Carbery achieved his 15 minutes of fame in 1980 in an incident that became known as the Carman Incident, which took place here at Moorabbin Oval. Carbery was an umpire, an AFL umpire, who ended up in some kind of exchange with Carman, fabulous Phil Carman, one of the league's best players, who lost his temper and headbutted Carbery. It was not something that anybody had ever done before, and not something that any football player's ever done since. It created a media sensation. The media were quite interested in who this Graham Carbery was and went looking, and soon found his association with the Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives. They were quite happy to out him, resulting in years of recurring coverage of the incident and a recurring outing of Graham Carbery. But it was his archives activities that were really his lasting contribution to the Australian gay community. In 1978, Graham Carbery had been instrumental in setting up the Australian Gay Archives, as it was then called. And for many years, for the rest of his life, in fact, Carbery remained involved with the archives as a committee member and indeed as housing the collection. At one point, he found it necessary to dig a basement under his house to house the expanding collection. Carbery had decided at the age of 12 that he was a homosexual, but he decided to just accept it. He knew he had to be discreet, but nothing more seemed to be required of him. Less well thought out was his decision at the age of 16 to join the Navy. Very quickly he realised this was a mistake and shot through, heading to Brisbane to start a new life for himself. Eventually, though, he decided to come back to the Navy to accept the consequences, but by telling them that he was homosexual, they pretty soon got rid of him. That left him to get on with the real things that made his life important. He was a teacher, he was the founder of the archives. He was also involved in the collection Young, Gay and Proud, which was a book written by teachers and students for gay teenagers in the late 1970s. All of these activities contributed greatly to the growth of the Australian gay and lesbian movement and the community that surrounded it. Working with him on the archives through all this time was his long-term partner, Gary Janes. In all of these activities, he contributed to the growth and maintenance and expansion of the gay and lesbian movement and community. But it's perhaps here at the Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives, surrounding us now, that we see his most lasting legacy.
Isn't that a fantastic resource we've got available to us? I had no idea that so much of our history could be in one place.
Yeah, the Gay and Lesbian Archives are a great source of information about the past, but also it's being kept very much alive for the future, because now I think there's a Facebook page where people can still connect and remember the past and talk about the future.
Absolutely.
A great result. So that's all from us on QTV for tonight. Join us again next week. Well, there'll be more from us. Good night, Tess.
Good night.
The event was held over 2 weekends, and it included games, drag performances, music by the Yangon Pride Choir, pop music performances,